have access to a type of knowledge that's about future events. And if we're going from the concept of linear time, of our typical ideas of time, and from a physicalist position or a materialist position, that can't be possible. So for me, again, when we look at premonitions in children, it raises a lot of questions around, what does it mean to be human? Who are we that we can do this and have these capacities? But also, what is the nature of time?
Hi, I'm Ferg. Welcome to Scout in the Woods, a podcast which explores the nature of reality, consciousness and story by foregrounding personal accounts of anomalous phenomena and the impact these experiences have had on those who encounter them. For this episode, number 3, I was grateful to have the chance at this early stage of the project to speak with Dr. Donna Thomas, a lecturer, writer, speaker and researcher in the social sciences at the University of Central Lancashire. On reaching out to Donna with heaps of shared interests, she took the time out of a busy day to join me on her phone, and I was really keen to glean her expertise on unexplained phenomena which happen to children. And in fact, Donna herself had an extraordinary near-death experience, or NDE as they're sometimes called, as a teenager. But alongside NDEs, which for me represent the best gateway into the world of unexplained phenomena, her work on premonitions was a further area that I wanted to quiz her about. As a specialist contributor, a guest on the show, I should say Donna now co-directs a research hub called IcreateS, has authored 16 papers and recently published a book about her work with children on self, consciousness and extrasensory experiences. She also holds an honorary research contract with Great Ormond Street Hospital and has extensive experience in local government and commercial research. I thoroughly enjoyed our chat and hope to reconnect with Donna again soon to dive a bit deeper and hopefully help in some small way to furnish a tiny corner of the black hole that is our understanding of these fascinating topics. For this conversation, we began by talking about the role of qualitative research in the sciences generally, and specifically in relation to the study of subjective experience, or experiences. So here I'd frame qualitative research as learning from personal data and personal expression, as opposed to hard statistics or measurable observations. Heads up that there's a few other conceptual bits and pieces on the way, as well as some amazing anecdotes. So it might help, for example, to think of materialism or physicalism as a philosophical framework which assumes that everything in our universe, including consciousness, has arisen from physical matter and processes. Interestingly, this common viewpoint is arguably gradually shifting now, not least with the rise of quantum theory and many of its leading exponents who suggest the world may actually be purely relational rather than exist in hard matter, as it were. So when Donna talks about subjectivity and experiments shortly, she's referring to a phenomenon called the observer effect in quantum research, where light waves or photons have been shown to change behaviour depending on whether or not they're observed. Well, let's get this one underway. I hope you enjoy it. Do reach out to Ferg at scoutinthewoods.com if you or a connection of yours has had an experience that you'd like to share.
Because our research tends to involve children from ages 4 up until 18 years. But across all that age group, premonitions are the highest reported experience, along with out-of-body experiences. This little boy, he knew where it was, and so the woman found what she was looking for.
Chorus is going to be thanks for the music and the songs we're singing. El Scotty in the wood, thanks in Rabbit Town. We're making over stained glass bottles, showing Sharon on the river of Styx, with his pockets full of colour for the pilgrims of love. For the music and the songs we're singing. El Scotty in the wood,
Yeah, no, that's right. Thanks, Ferg. So it's IcreateS. It's an international research unit that is about exploring consciousness in a qualitative way, which means exploring it with what we would consider to be everyday people, rather than continually exploring or investigating and thinking about consciousness through disciplines such as neuroscience, biology, the hard, let's just say the harder sciences. We miss an awful lot when we're not asking people what their experiences of consciousness are. A lot of research around people's experience comes from these brain-based models. So that's the idea that the brain produces consciousness. And of course, that's based on the premise of physicalism or materialism, which, as we now know, is coming under fire from many scientists and philosophers across different fields. So everything's up for debate in a sense, but we can't have a rich debate around consciousness, for example, or near-death experiences, or whatever the experiences are, even the most mundane experiences, without actually involving the people who so-called produce consciousness or experience consciousness, or who are consciousness, which is more of an ontological question probably. But yeah, so it's just really important, you know. Qualitative research, for example, you know, has had a bit of a rough road in terms of it being seen as a real science. You know, it's often seen as woolly or too subjective. But even subjectivity is up for debate now, when we're starting to think about how we as humans, or our cognition, or our perceptions, can actually influence the experiments, for example. So it's all up for debate, and I think that's really exciting as well.
I've sent you over a whole list of questions that I'd hope we might talk through, which is way too much. Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of fledgling indie podcast, which I'm hoping will grow. I do think there's a niche for reaching folk with these qualitative studies and reaching an audience that's more secular, perhaps skeptical, agnostic, because there's a lot online that and a lot of the channels where you can hear about people's near-death experiences, they're fascinating, they're amazing. Everything that comes with those channels makes them difficult for, say, a skeptic or a very secular audience to engage with. I don't know if this helps. Picture of a dog jumping through a supernova, but there's a story behind this as well. So
just, if we think about mainstream science, mainstream research, whether it's, I mean, even in the social sciences, we always tend to research kind of typical I won't say mundane, because we research really important experiences. So, for example, people's experiences of health or homelessness and these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But we leave out a whole spectrum of human experience. So the research that I conduct is trying to, in a sense, fill that gap, and with a group, you know, a part of our population that again is seen as marginalized or often excluded from research, which is children. And especially in the fields of, for example, parapsychology or consciousness studies.
I mean, I wanted to ask, because we haven't got loads and loads of time, I wanted to ask you about premonitions and precognition, because that relates to a couple of stories I'm working on at the minute, or a couple of experiences that my guests have had.
So one of the most reported experiences from children will be premonitions. So it's quite a good experience to start with, Ferg.
Mm-hmm.
Now, many children and young people, because our research tends to involve children from ages 4 up until 18 years. And I know that at 18 years, obviously teenagers are coming into adulthood. And even within that age bracket, there's obviously clear differences between a child who is 4 or 5 and then a young person who is 13, 14. But across all that age group, premonitions are the highest reported experience, along with out-of-body experiences, which is another highly reported experience. Now, with younger children, it's really interesting, because many of their premonition experiences will often be with the close ones, with their parent, for example. And there'll be things like knowing, for example, that they're going to get a puppy in the next day or 2 days, when it's meant to be a complete surprise, when they know absolutely nothing about it, when it's, you know, there's not been any clues around the house that children could, because children are very astute and they could, you know, key into that. But when it's, for example, meant to be a complete surprise, unexpected, they already know about this. So that's one example. And just little things. So having premonitions about when they go to school, a friend will give them an object, but they already saw it the day before, they saw this happening.
Mm-hmm.
And this can happen not just, you know, during waking consciousness when they're awake and active in the day, but in dreams as well. So dreams are quite common, where children will have dreams about things that might happen, and even bereavements in the family as well. So yeah, it's interesting, and it's highly reported.
In your book, which I'll quote if I can, so children's unexplained experiences in a post materialist world, what children can teach us about the mystery of being human. I had a dig into it yesterday. I found in this section I came across two stories you mentioned about a car, and I think it was lost keys, perhaps.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
recall if those were the children had those premonitions in a dream, or was it just a general sense there? Can you remember those specific? Sorry to put you on the spot with those, but
No, that's fine. You know, because obviously there are so many studies and still ongoing studies, and we have so many examples and so many stories. But I do remember. I think there was one premonition. The keys, that was with the little boy who, I think it was his mum's friend who had lost something, and she was frantically and desperate trying to find something. And the little boy who was at home with his mother, he knew nothing about this conversation. So, you know, the friend had contacted his mother saying that she'd lost something. And the little boy didn't know about this. But when the little boy's mother got off the phone, the little boy who had been in the other room as well said, I know where your friend's, I don't know if it was keys or it was a letter or something, but it was an object, and this woman had been frantically trying to find it. This little boy, he knew where it was, and so you know, the woman found what she was looking for. So that, you know, there's also examples of things like that when children just, it's almost as if younger children and older children as well, they have access to a type of knowledge that's about future events. And if we're going from the concept of linear time, of our typical ideas of time, and from a physicalist position or a materialist position, that can't be possible because that event, for example, hasn't occurred yet. And as human beings, we do not have the capacity to see into a future event. So for me, again, when we look at premonitions in children, it raises a lot of questions around, A, what does it mean to be human? You know, who are we that we can do this and have these capacities? But also, you know, what is the nature of time? Is time linear, or is it something that's occurring all at once? So I think that's a really good example of why it's really important to involve children in these kinds of research, and how their contribution can also inform, you know, the whole body of research with adult populations that's going on at the moment as well.
yeah, and there's so much in all of that, and I loved it in your book that you kept coming back, I think, to who or what are we? You know, that's the central question, the lens through which you're addressing your research and your quality, you know, your understanding of these children experiencing this stuff that, you know, for a lot of people out there just shouldn't be possible, right? That it's difficult to even address or approach for folk. But did you? I'm wondering about the why children might have a precognitive experience. Is it related to something that needs to happen? Is it functional in many of the cases that you come across, in that it helps someone? So there's another example you gave in your book was of a car crash that a young child avoided because they'd had a sense of foreboding, you know, deep sense of foreboding about going, and didn't go. Sure enough, there was a crash. Everyone was okay in the end. Thank God. But what I'm getting in your answer just then, there was perhaps a connection between emotions and the strength of emotion around some of these things some of the things that relate to the premonition that they have. I don't know. What would be your guess? or
Yeah, well, I think you've hit something on the head there. So I think there are the premonitions that might not carry as much functional value as some of the others. So, for example, the premonition about the car crash was very, very functional because it prevented that girl from getting into a car where if she had have got into that car, they could have died because the car would have been overcrowded. When the car crashed, that could have been much worse. So that is a functional premonition in a sense, in that it's saved her and other teenagers from, but we don't know what. But then, there's other like premonitions about going to school and you're gifted with an object. So in this case, I'm thinking of it was a pencil, or there was a particular kind of pencil. So it wasn't just a pencil, it was a pencil with a rubber on. So it was very detailed in a sense. We might say that's not very functional, or in the same way as not getting into a car and avoiding being hurt. It seems to be a different thing. And it might be that those premonitions that are quite functional, maybe there is an emotional element there, in the sense of emotion is energy, and maybe that in a way can open something up where we are accessing knowledge, for example, that we might not necessarily always access. There's lots of theories around this, and maybe part of being human is that we do have these capacities, especially with our close ones, with our loved ones, in our social groups, because many of these premonitions, you'll find that they're all linked to either, with the teenagers, it's more their friends and their peers, but teenagers seem to be always more emotionally connected to their friends and peers. I remember that I was when I was a teenager, whereas younger children are more emotionally invested in, obviously, parents and carers. And then younger children report more of these premonitions with mothers and parents and carers, whereas teenagers more with their peers. For example, they have shared dreams, do teenagers. They report shared dreams and these kinds of phenomena as well. So I think there's something to do with some kind of resonance in terms of your very close social group. And actually, Rupert Sheldrake writes about this in terms of morphic resonance, thinking about social groups and social consciousness, but more around social memory and these kinds of things too.
Yeah, so interesting. And I mean, a morphic resonance and shared consciousness in nature are, again, concepts that a materialist paradigm just can't really cope with, and just fascinating. I think my brain's cramping on it. Perhaps I've got too much materialism in my brain.
Okay, so Ferg just dropping in here with a quick heads up on some names that are coming up. Donna just mentioned Rupert Sheldrake. Sheldrake is a pioneering scientist, now as relevant as ever, who has studied spiritual and unexplained phenomena. You'll also hear the name Carl Jung, who was essentially Sigmund Freud's protege in the mid-20th century. He explored spiritual aspects of the mind, diverging from Freud's atheistic approach. Alex Tannis was known for teaching and studying psychic abilities, including his own, in the Cold War era. Julian Mossbridge, Mark Whitman, Dean Radin and Chris Rowe are all contemporary researchers with backgrounds in psychology and neurology, who've studied precognition and related phenomena. And finally, Bernardo Kastrup runs the Essentia Foundation and has proposed analytic idealism as an alternative framework to the still predominant materialist metaphysics in the secular West. In analytic idealism, there's a world outside of us which is independent from our own minds, but this world fundamentally is experiential and physical matter emerges from it, not the other way around. So with that, let's kick on and see how these voices fit into Donna's thinking.
Have you come across Julian Mossbridge?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've not listened to nearly enough of her work yet, or read enough of her work, and it's interesting because I've not. Although we have lots of examples of children and time in a way, I've not really looked at that so closely, but I've just started to have lots of conversations with Mark Whitman. who is a psychologist, but is really involved in research that looks at time and the experiences of time. So I think this is one of the key things when we're doing this research with children. It really does hook in to what other scientists are looking at. And what's really nice about this is that scientists who wouldn't normally probably research with children are becoming very, very interested in how children experience, self, others, and the world. What do you think that's different about children? Well, they're very young, that they may be very close to something that Carl Jung saw as the original vision, this dynamic ground of being, something that we may lose touch with, for example, as we grow older, as we become more conditioned, as we start to develop a sense of separation and an ego self and all these kinds of things. But I think as a human being, we all have these experiences, and I think some of us might be more conscious of them than others too.
Yeah,
I've
just been quizzing folk about this weird stuff, for like, I say weird, it's probably frustrating to hear so I say, but for most people it is, weird. Even though it's so everyday. There's so part of the earlier episodes of this podcast, really, because I don't have a massive scope just yet, is finding out how close we are to people who've experienced pretty phenomenal stuff. Even something as mundane, or not mundane, but mundane relative to the stories that the experiences that you've shared even this morning. A colleague from work was saying, no, I never really had experienced that, so I'm a bit of a skeptic, not really me, that stuff. And then he said, well, it was when I was about 10. I do remember being conscious and on the other side of the room. It was weird, but never really thought anything of that again. And then I was drunk the other day and the same thing happened, but that was probably just a drink. And of course people put it down to the the material. When they've got something they can nail it on in terms of drugs, they think the drug produces that, rather because of the whole paradigm of producing, your brain produces consciousness. So if you tweak the brain, it produces something different. Of course there are other ways to look at it in terms of experiencing it and opening up the brain. So
sounds like bilocation, what your friend was describing. Was he experiencing himself in two places at once?
I don't know if he was experiencing himself in his bed as well, but he said he felt like an awareness. So he was a point of awareness on the other side of the room. That's what he said. But yeah, I mean.
But children do report bilocation as well, which is interesting. So there was a book written in the 70s by a chap called Alex Tanos, and he describes how children have reported bilocation, which is the sense or the experience of being in two places at once. So over here and over here. But interestingly, in our own research, in our near-death experience research with children, children have reported to us that they've been in two places at once as well. So it is a phenomena, and it's a very interesting one.
I was just going to say, because on the Julian Mossbridge, because I listened to her interview after coming across yourself on the Essentia Foundation video haul, which is incredible, and I loved your interview on that, by the way.
Thank you.
But Dr. Julian Mossbridge, she talks about just ordinary people having. So they conducted experiments which measure heart rate and stuff, and you seem to have a reaction before you experience a reveal. So if it's if you can sort of show in quite a statistical way to people, this is there's a phenomenon here that's breaking down our concept of linear time, in a way that's quite quantitatively researchable. Then hopefully that might open people's minds up to these more qualitative studies, which are way more profound, I guess, in terms of what kids are having premonitions about, or what people.
But Dean Radin, I think it's Dean Radin. I mean, you might have to check this. I think he did a series of experiments. I'm not sure if Chris Rowe has done this as well. Again, you need to fact check those two names. But they did something very similar. I don't know if this is similar to what Julia's done, but they were showing participants a screen with snapshots of different images. And I think there was some kind of raise in something that was happening in the body just before something that would be highly emotive was shown to the participants. So it could be, you know, something that would raise either fear or disgust or joy, you know, these really deep emotions. And I think that they were registering some kind of biochemical changes, you know, within the body. And it sounds really similar. So I think that there is data, you know, some of the harder scientific data, although I don't like to call it hard and soft data, because again, if we call the stories and the living experiences of people soft data, it's not taken as valid. You know, it's not given the validity as and you know, one of our arguments is that it should be. It's just a different kind of science, but it should carry the very same value, especially if it's about subjectivity and subjective experiences and consciousness and these kinds of things that we need to explore.
Yeah, definitely. It's just amazing, you know, 50 years down the line from, you know, when a small amount of people were starting to research NDEs more publicly. There's just been a closed. It's a sociological phenomenon, you know, that this hasn't been explored more, and it's only until you get the hard stuff that that folk may be a bit more open to it. Maybe, I don't know. It's because it's not soft. It's like that the content is really important, and it's still not discussed. I wonder whether there's a hesitancy to discuss the want to say even spiritual side of those experiences, because, you know, as soon as you say that word or something like that, then the scientific world goes, you know, is that something? I mean, you have shared your own experience of an NDE as, I think, a 15-year-old or so in the preface to your book. So it's obviously something you're happy to share publicly with folk to give your context as a researcher. Do you how far do you think about spirituality in with these experiences, and do you ever include that within your work, or in terms of discussing it with folk or discussing it publicly, or does that become a kind of a turn off for other people who might just not engage if you go too far down that route?
Well, I very rarely discuss it with anyone. I think it is in my book, and it does preface the book. And the reason why that has to be there is, as a qualitative researcher, we have to be reflexive, and we have to be as honest as we can about our own position, and our own agendas as researchers, and how that might affect researching with people if we're not aware of it. So the idea is that to be reflexive in research is that we're very aware of our own beliefs, biases, agendas, etc. But we have to put them there and try to put them on hold when we're actually doing the research. And we try the best that we can not to allow that to influence it in any way. So in terms of my research practice, I don't tell my participants. I park it there and we keep it research because it's research. Now, interestingly, I think because, you know, I am known for this kind of work, I will often have parents contact me, or if there's anyone I know where the children are having particular experiences, and then they will come over, and then I can say, well, you know, this happened to me, and it's okay, and it happens to lots of children, and it happens to lots of adults, and we don't understand enough about it yet, but what I can tell you that it's absolutely okay. So, you know, I can have, when I'm not involved in research, I can, and I do have these discussions with children and parents, and that's not in a therapeutic role. I'm not a therapist, I'm a social scientist, and I'm a researcher. So, you know, I'm not involved in therapy. But the research itself, I think, carries that kind of therapeutic value. So, for example, when we do the near-death experience research with parents and children on an ICU ward, the parents will always say to us, you know, this was amazing. You know, it feels so good to be able to tell somebody that I saw an angel at the bottom of my son's bed when he died, and then he was obviously resuscitated. Because they can't have these conversations with doctors. You know, doctors and nurses are wonderful and they're saving lives, and of course they have to be extremely focused and medical. So for example, it's a good example to show where the research can have some really great therapeutic benefits for parents and children. Even just to share their experiences is fantastic for them, and we've had that as actual feedback, so that's lovely. But it isn't your standard therapy where, so what I'm trying to say is we keep it as scientific as possible in terms of qualitative research practice. Yeah, and try to keep that part there.
I guess you can't ignore it. It's real world because it's experienced. So if that has a spiritual element for folk, then it has to be kind of entertained or, you know, put out there. Otherwise you're just boxing something up and pretending it isn't there. That's
no, absolutely. Now, and so in terms of where I come from, not with my non-professional hat on, you know, of course, for me, we are far more than being a biological machine. We have so little understanding about what it means to be human, about what consciousness is. You know, I firmly, through my own experiences, I mean, definitely through the research, definitely through philosophical inquiry and from others and science that's coming out, you know, I think it becomes really clear that what we refer to as consciousness is non-local. You know, for me, I think it's completely the other way around. I think that matter and the physical is some kind of expression of the mental, of consciousness. You know, I completely tip it the other way around. And really that is from my own experience as a 15-year-old, but now also compounded with doing the research with many other children and young people, you know, reading about research with adults, speaking to other scientists, and it's a whole body of knowledge, but it's a body of knowledge that is really rooted in living experience. And I think, you know, we are far more than this and this reality. And yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think post materialism is at the very least a good bet. There's basically all of the other options out there in terms of your metaphysics, but you know, consciousness emerging from hard matter, you know, exclusively. It's a tricky one, and yet it's the one that we're all conditioned to kind of, I guess, think.
It's interesting because even, you know, physics is showing that what we always thought was matter perhaps as being something solid and dead and inert isn't, you know, itself isn't solid. It's waves and space and I think part of this for me is, you know, how do we define matter, you know, or how do we redefine matter? And I think that when we start to think about matter differently and the things that we thought were physical, and I think it becomes more logical then that, you know, the starting point should be consciousness. And it becomes a little bit more ridiculous how matter could produce this thing that we call consciousness.
Yeah, and Bernardo Kastrup's explanation in the first few sort of, he gives I think 6 or 7 videos and it explaining analytic idealism as an alternative kind of metaphysics to materialism, which I think you have a lot of sympathy with yourself, right? And he does a great job of just saying how ridiculous it is for us to have kind of, you know, in the post Enlightenment or in the Enlightenment kind of through that created this idea that the matter was primary and then, you know, consciousness emerges from it. And nope, it's gone. I had another thought. You can see how fizzy I get just thinking and discussing all this stuff.
I think we all get like that with it because you know, it is. I think that again, if we stay with experience and think about how logical. So you know, you mentioned analytical idealism, and I do land on that. And again, the first time I listened to Bernardo Kastrup, something non-scientific resonated first, and that kind of was linked to my experience as a 15-year-old, and the way that he described this one subject or this field of subjectivity was something that I really resonated with, because I felt that I'd experienced that during my own car crash. And I know we can talk about this maybe when we speak again. So immediately it resonated. But the more that I studied analytical idealism, the arguments are superb. It's completely rational. It's completely logical. The idea that there is a field of subjectivity, and that everything else may emerge from that, and that matter could be an extrinsic appearance of that. For me, it just makes perfect sense, and I think it offers a really great explanation for a lot of our questions, a lot of the questions that we have, the big questions. What is life? What is death? Who are we? What is self? All these kinds of things. And as an academic, so that was me personally, but as an academic, I was like, hooray! Now we have a platform. Now we have something that's very rigorous and academic that we can appeal to be able to talk about these experiences, for example, or consciousness, in a way that we can in academia, because it was completely missing. And for me, I think that's what Bernardo has brought for academics like myself, who are very interested in post materialism. It's really valuable.
Amazing, yeah.
Okay, well, that is just about all we had time for in this conversation, at least. I think that the qualitative research in this area is really exciting at this stage, and I'm really curious to see how much momentum it could get within the sciences and with public at large. I really look forward to catching up with Donna soon to learn more about a range of other ESP cases, her work around narrative structure, and lots more. So a big thanks to her for these fascinating insights and reflections. If you'd like to learn more about Donna's research, you can follow her on Twitter at Donna M. Thomas, or check out the University of Lancashire website and head to the IcreateS page.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Donna.
See you soon. Take care.
Bye. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye.
If anyone listening in would like to share a fringe experience they've personally had, or recommend a friend or family member with a story to tell, please contact Ferg at scoutinthewoods.com. That's Ferg at scoutinthewoods.com. You can watch Scout in the Woods on YouTube or listen on your favourite podcast app. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy your day, evening, night, etc. All right, here we go.
Maybe part of being human is that we do have these capacities, and it might be that those premonitions that are quite functional, maybe there is an emotional element there, in the sense of emotion is energy, and maybe that in a way can open something up